Dan Carter, a 32-year-old wildlife photographer from Atlanta, had always sought places untouched by time. In June 2024, he flew to République de Lumba, a dense and remote section of Central Africa, known for its thick canopy, hidden rivers, and wild animals rarely seen by outsiders. His goal was simple yet ambitious: to photograph rare bird species in the early morning mist and capture the forest in its rawest, untamed light. Friends warned him about the dangers, but Dan's curiosity was unyielding. He called it seeking the heart of the world, unaware that the heart he sought would become a cage. On a second day in the forest, Dan ventured alone along a narrow path by a rushing tributary. Without warning, 4 masked men, members of the Red Thorn Brigade, a local militia group, emerged from the shadows. He was ambushed, bound with rough fines, and dragged deeper into the jungle. But dense foliage swallowed all signs of civilization. Dan's guide escaped in the chaos, leaving him alone. From that moment, the forest became both prison and predator. Captivity in the jungle was unlike anything most people could imagine. Dan was confined in a bamboo cage hidden beneath an endless canopy, where sunlight barely penetrated. The air was hot, thick, and suffocating. Mosquitoes swarmed, landing in patterns that seemed intentional, each bite a reminder of his vulnerability. Food was sparse: small bowls of rice, bitter leaves, and water drawn from muddy pools. The guards' threats were constant, alternating between verbal intimidation and the cold, deliberate click of firearms. Yet while he was physically restrained, Dan's mind became his only tool for survival. He memorized guard rotations, noting which men slept too deeply, which paced predictably, and which left their boots unattended near the cage. Every detail became a lifeline. The jungle itself seemed to wage war against him. Darkness was absolute at night. Each rustle of leaves was a question: predator or human? Time lost all meaning. Hours stretched into days, and his body began to weaken under the combination of heat, exhaustion, and insufficient nutrition. Fever spiked, and minor cuts festered. Yet Dan found ways to maintain mental control, counting breaths, retracing paths in his mind, and whispering to himself about his sister, Lisa, and the life he hoped to return to. Hope became both his anchor and tormentor. One evening, a distant buzzing sound reached him, a reconnaissance drone passing overhead. The camp erupted into chaos. Militia members scrambled to hide equipment, shouting, firing weapons into the air. Amidst the confusion, a guard carelessly left the corner of Dan's cage unsecured. Rain began to pour, drumming on the bamboo roof, masking his movements. Using a sharp splinter of bamboo he had hidden, Dan painstakingly cut through the vines binding his wrists. His palms bled, but the final strand snapped. He slipped under the bars and into the jungle darkness, free for the first time in days. The forest was alive, watching. Gunfire echoed behind him. Branches tore at his clothes and skin. Mud pulled at his bare feet. Ahead he saw a jagged river, rushing and wild. Behind him, the militia closed in. Dan had a single choice: confront the armed men or risk the river's current. He dove in. The cold water seized him, twirling him under debris. Panic threatened to drown him, but instinct prevailed. Hours later, bruised, exhausted, and soaked, he staggered onto the opposite bank, deeper into the wilderness, but further from the men who had captured him. Alone, wounded, and disoriented, Dan now faced a new challenge: surviving in a jungle that did not care if he lived or died. Hunger gnawed at him. He scavenged for edible berries, palm hearts, and even insects. He drank rainwater collected on leaves, each sip a temporary reprieve from thirst. Night brought predators. A jaguar prowled nearby one evening, its golden eyes locking onto his position. Dan froze, letting the creature pass, realizing instinct could be more lethal than the armed men behind him. His survival depended on patience, careful movement, and a willingness to endure unimaginable discomfort.
Dan staggered through the dense jungle, each step sinking into mud and leaf litter, his body screaming in protest. Every sound became a test: branches snapping, distant animal cries, even the wind felt threatening. The forest had claimed him once. It could do so again. He had no map, no compass, no guide. Only his wits, his memory of the sun's path, and a single-minded will to survive. Hunger gnawed relentlessly, but he forced himself to keep moving, picking edible berries and insects wherever he could, his hands trembling with fatigue. By the second night, exhaustion and fever were beginning to blur the line between reality and hallucination. Shadows seemed to move in unnatural ways. A rustle in the leaves revealed glowing eyes, probably a nocturnal predator, but Dan could not afford panic. He froze, heart hammering, and slowly backed away. Each night, the forest became more alive, more threatening. Crocodiles lurked in the river he had barely escaped, venomous snakes slithered among roots, and insects swarmed, leaving painful welts across his skin. Yet, for all its menace, the jungle provided occasional sustenance. Rainwater pooled on broad leaves, small fruits and roots kept him alive, and the occasional fish trapped in shallow streams gave fleeting nourishment. Dan's mind constantly replayed his capture. He cataloged every lesson learned in captivity, which way guards had approached, the location of the river, patterns in wildlife movement. It was this mental map that guided him north, toward what he hoped would be civilization. Each step was a gamble. One misstep could mean a fall, a bite, or an encounter with the armed men still likely searching for him. And yet, he had learned patience, learned to move silently, learned to blend into the jungle like another shadow. On the third day of his escape, he stumbled upon a small stream, a lifeline of clean water. While drinking, he noticed tracks, human tracks. His heart leapt, torn between hope and caution. He followed the trail, careful to leave no trace, and it led to a small clearing. Here, the forest opened slightly, revealing evidence of human activity: a broken hut, an abandoned cooking fire, a path heading toward a distant village. Relief surged, but he knew the last stretch would be the most dangerous. The militants could still be nearby, watching for any sign of him, and the forest would take its toll on anyone moving slowly or visibly. Night fell as he pressed on. Hunger and dehydration had sapped his strength, but energy carried him forward. He climbed fallen trees, crawled through underbrush, and avoided open spaces that could expose him to predators or armed men. At one point, he paused to rest beneath a massive tree, listening to the jungle's chorus. The calls of birds, the rustle of leaves, the distant roar of a predator. He realized he had become hyper-aware of every sound, every movement. This acute vigilance, born of terror, was now his survival mechanism. By the early morning of the fifth day, Dan caught sight of smoke rising in the distance. It was faint, barely visible through the heavy foliage, but it was the first sign of human presence he had seen in days. Summoning his last reserves of energy, he moved toward it. Emerging from the dense jungle, he found a small village of local farmers tending their fields. Collapsing near the edge, bruised, bloodied, and nearly unrecognizable, he was discovered by a woman who immediately alerted the community. They provided water, wrapped his wounds, and contacted the authorities. Dan was alive, emaciated, weakened, and forever marked by the jungle, but alive. In the aftermath, Dan's story became both a cautionary tale and a testament to human endurance. He had survived captivity, hunger, dehydration, and a jungle that had seemed to determine to consume him. His escape was not a matter of luck alone. It was a combination of observation, patience, mental fortitude, and sheer willpower. The forest that had threatened to kill him had also tested him, forcing him to confront the extremes of fear, isolation, and instinct. For Dan, survival meant more than escaping armed men. It meant outlasting the primal wilderness itself. His return was quiet but profound. Authorities debriefed him, medical staff treated his injuries, and his story reached the families of other travelers who had vanished in conflict zones. Dan carried back more than photographs. He carried lessons etched into his body and mind, a reminder that beauty and danger often walk hand in hand. Though the forest remained behind him, the memory of every shadow, every night spent on the edge of life, lingered. For those who would follow in his footsteps, Dan Carter's ordeal remains a stark warning. In the heart of the wilderness, survival demands vigilance, courage and a willingness to face terror alone, without assurance of rescue.